Welcome, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom. Today we start the Melchizedek message, and we will be reviewing Acts chapter 7 over the next several Shabbats. It's a very important chapter, and it spells out clearly the Melchizedek message. To understand the Melchizedek Covenant Confirming Gospel message, one must go back to the promise given to Abraham, just like Stephen presented in Acts chapter 7. The covenant we enter with Yahusha when we are born again is much more than what the average believer realizes. It could be even said that most believers do not even understand the covenant at all, or they just understand part of it. Most of us in this Shabbat group would agree that we too, at one time, we were in the same boat, were we not? Stephen's witness before the council in Acts chapter 7 serves as a blueprint in understanding, but also helps us know how to share the true Melchizedek covenant confirming gospel message. And that's huge. The book of Acts shows the shift back to the Melchizedek Kingdom of Priests and away from what was once called the Aaronic Levitical Priesthood. Not only that, the book of Acts shows that when there is a change in priesthood, there is a change in law, as so stated in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 11 through 12. Therefore, all of this was taking place, which most people missed in the book of Acts. All of this was taking place, a change of priesthood, a change of law, and a change in priesthood back to the order of Melchizedek, which warranted a change in law back to covenant Torah. You see, most don't even realize that the Melchizedek order preceded the Aaronic Levitical priesthood. The book of the law, which was a very harsh tutor, was implemented after the sin of the golden calf until Yahusha could once again restore the Melchizedek priesthood back to its reigning position. And the Aaronic Levitical priesthood was established to administer this harsh schoolmaster of the book of the law. And it brings us all back to the point of, do we know how to rightly divide his word of truth? And most do not. But by going through Acts chapter 7, by coming together through this series, if you do not understand that, which many of us did not at one point, you will. And not only that, his whole word will come to life, and you will know who you are. You are Israel born from above, and we are his kingdom of priests after every tongue, tribe, people, and nation. There's neither Jew nor Greek, male or female, slave or free. Hallelujah. And that can only take place through our high priest, Yahusha HaMashiach, after the order of Melchizedek.
I won't lie. fields of grass and pleasant green. It gives me peace. Yahweh guides my pathway. Yahweh guides my pathway. To quiet waters He will lead me to drink.
So I wanted to review some of the events prior to Stephen's witness. I want to take us briefly back to Acts chapter 1 and quickly advance us to Acts chapter 7. So in Acts chapter 1, Yahusha told them, wait in Jerusalem for the promise. And we know on the 40th day, Yahusha ascended before his very eyes as they were in the very midst of the counting of the Omer. And 10 days later, on the 50th day, Shavuot, Pentecost, the disciples received the Ruach HaKodesh, Holy Spirit. Afterwards, on that same day, Peter witnessed, and 3,000 were immersed and saved. Unlike the time back after the sin of the golden calf, how 3,000 were lost and died that day. And Peter continued, and the other disciples continued day by day. More were added. Peter's additional witness is given in Acts 3. Part of that, we read, and likewise, all the prophets who have spoken from Samuel and those following have also announced these days, you are sons of the prophets and of the covenant which Elohim made with our fathers, saying to Abraham, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. To you first, Elohim, having raised up his servant Yahusha, sent him to bless you in turning away each one of you from your wicked ways. Then later in Acts chapter 4, Peter and John did more witnessing, and then they were brought also before the council. The believers back in that day, they prayed for boldness and they shared their resources with one another. Then later we saw Ananias and Sapphira bring in deception among the believers. Peter and John, in their very boldness of being strong witnesses, were imprisoned. They were both imprisoned at one time, and they were released by a messenger of Yahweh. Then they even go and do more witnessing once they're broken out of prison by the messenger, and they go to Solomon's porch and share more. And then guards are sent to gather them up again and bring them back before the council. And a little excerpt from chapter 5, we read, and having brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest asked them, saying, did we not strictly command you not to teach in this name? And look, you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and intend to bring the blood of this man upon us? And Peter and the other emissaries answering said, we have to obey Elohim rather than men. The Elohim of our fathers raised up Yahusha, whom you laid hands on, hanging him on a timber. Him, a prince and a savior, Elohim has exalted to his right hand to give repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins. And we are his witnesses to these matters. And so also is the set apart spirit whom Elohim has given to those who obey him. Then in Acts chapter 6, 7 men are chosen among the believers to help serve the people. And Stephen was one of those among the 7. And sadly, but yet gloriously, Stephen ends up being targeted, seized, and falsely accused, but it didn't dampen his witness whatsoever. As we begin, we need to define who is Israel, because so many people today are confused on even who Israel is. We need to understand that Israel are those born from above by faith in Yahusha HaMashiach. The state in the Middle East named Israel that was approved by the League of Nations is a different Israel. Though there may be true believers in that region, for the most part, his name cannot even be spoken within its borders. Something's wrong with that picture. Israel is the name of his people. Are you his people? Have you been born anew? Have you entered into the covenant? Have you partaken of the elements of wine and bread? The covenant confirming meal? Israel is a name of his people. If you have entered into that covenant, you are his people. You are Israel. And Yahusha HaMashiach is our high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Psalm 110, 4 and 5. Israel, born from above, are all those that have received Yahusha, that have been washed by the blood of the Lamb, and have entered into his new Melchizedek Covenant Confirming Gospel message, whether they are from the natural branch or if they're grafted in. Remember, there's no Jew or Gentile. Remember that. They all must enter through the narrow gate. They all must enter through Yahusha HaMashiach, the door of the sheepfold. Yahusha once again proposed to us, and those that say yes to his proposal and partake of the covenant confirming elements of bread and wine have become betrothed to him. Covenant believers are to biblically partake of the elements once a year at Passover in remembrance of him, instead of Ishtar, Easter, that celebrates the fertility goddess. But most of the traditional churches will not spell that out for you. If you love Yahweh, you'll keep his commandments, and you'll search his word and see that these things be so. I don't want you to take it from me. Just open his word. For believers that are unable to partake at the time of Passover in the first month on the 14th day, the Bible states the observance can be done in the second month on the 14th day. But most of us that came out of the traditional church setting, many times it's celebrated once a week. Where is that validated in his word? Again, search the scriptures and see what the scriptures say. For we see in Numbers chapter 9, verse 9, and Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, when any male of you or your generations is unclean for a being, for a soul, maybe someone had died and they had to take care of it, or is far away on a journey, he shall still perform the Passover of Yahweh. On the 14th day of the second new month, between the evenings, they perform it. With unleavened bread and bitter herbs, they eat it. Stephen divinely articulates the Melchizedek message in Acts chapter 7 before the council. It's really a divine, glorious chapter. Stephen had learned and received the new covenant confirming gospel message through possibly the disciples, and possibly he heard directly from Yahusha at a synagogue. He was so filled with the Ruach HaKodesh that his words transported all those present through the time from Abraham to the fulfillment of the promise. All those present were taken on a journey that pierced their hearts. That historic day, Stephen defeated the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the word of his testimony. To this day, Stephen's testimony stands strong. In Revelation 12:11, we read, and they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their witness, and they did not love their lives to the death. We too have been bestowed with that same power. And we too may find ourselves in the days in which we live in a similar position as Stephen. So Stephen stood before the council. The accuser of the brethren had targeted Stephen. In Acts chapter 6, just prior to the chapter we will be studying in Acts chapter 7, we read, "And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes. So they came upon him, seized him, and brought him to the council. And they set up false witnesses who said, 'This man does not cease to speak blasphemous words against the set apart place and the Torah. For we have heard him saying that this Yahusha of Nazareth shall overthrow this place and change the institutes which Moses delivered unto us.' And all who sat in the council, looking steadily at him, saw his face was like the face of a heavenly messenger." So we begin in Acts chapter 7. "And the high priest said, 'Is this so?' And Stephen replied, 'Men, brothers, and fathers, listen. The Elohim of esteem appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Aram Naharaim, otherwise known as Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran, and said to him, "Come out of your land and from your relatives, and come here into a land that I shall show you." So right there, boom, he takes them back to the promise given to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, 1 through 3, which was the unconditional promise. He could swear by no one other higher than himself. If Yahweh gives a promise, it's a promise. And Yahweh said to Abram, "Go yourself out of your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house, to a land which I show you. And I shall make you a great nation, and bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I shall bless those who bless you, and curse him who curses you. And in you all the clans of the earth shall be blessed." Now, as we proceed, I want us to keep this in mind, because the seed of promise would come through Abraham and his union with Sarah. And that's found in Genesis 17, 19 through 21. "And Elohim said, 'No, Sarah, your wife, is truly bearing a son to you, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I shall establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. See, I shall bless him, and shall make him fruitful, and greatly increase him. He is to bring forth 12 princes, and I shall make him a great nation. But my covenant I establish with Isaac, whom Sarah is to bear to you at this appointed time next year.'" You see, we know Yahweh immediately implemented his plan to save his people after the sin of Adam and Eve, and gave his promise to do so to Abraham. This promise would continue through his seed Isaac from the union with Sarah, not through Hagar's son Ishmael, nor through Abraham's other descendants he had later on through Keturah. No, it would come through Isaac. And this is where you find the unconditional promise. This is something everyone should remember, where the unconditional promise given to Abraham is located. Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. We continue in Acts chapter 7, 4 and 5. "Then he came out of the land of the Kasdim and dwelt in Haran. And from there, after the death of his father, he removed him to this land in which you now dwell. And he gave him no inheritance in it, not a foot of it. But he promised to give it to him for a possession, and to his seed after him, when as yet he had no child. You know, Abraham didn't have Isaac till he was 100 years old. So you see all the footnote cross references to Genesis, 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 Genesis. That's important. And we're in the New Testament. That's important because we need to know the front of the book before we can understand the back of the book. The book of Genesis is very important in understanding the foundation of our faith. The sequence of events are very important, and their location in his word need to become second nature to us. We need to know that in Genesis 13, Abraham and Lot separate. We need to know in Genesis 14, Abraham rescues Lot in the midst of the Battle of the Kings. And after Abraham's victory, Melchizedek, sovereign of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and that's the first mention of bread and wine. Now, he, the Melchizedek, sovereign of Salem, was the priest of the Most High El. And the book of Jasher, or Yasher, identifies this Melchizedek as Shem, which was a type and shadow of Yahusha HaMashiach. The stage is clearly set for the royal righteous line to unfold. In Genesis 15, Abraham asked, Master Yahweh, whereby do I know that I'll possess the land and all the promise that he had shared with him already in Genesis 12? And because he asked that, the original unconditional promise was changed to a conditional promise. And we'll look into that further. But that occurs in Genesis 15 with the flaying of the animals. And then in Genesis 17, we're going to look further into the covenant of circumcision. But all of Genesis, all these verses in Genesis were cross-referenced. And all the people in this council that Stephen was addressing, they knew what Stephen was speaking of. They may not have liked what Stephen was speaking of, but they knew what he was speaking of, and it convicted them. And actually, you see them manifesting evil. So from Abraham's question, Master Yahweh, whereby do I know that I possess it? Precedes the covenant flaying of the animals that turns the unconditional promise of Genesis 12 into a conditional promise, meaning if broken, someone would have to die. That someone would one day be Yahusha HaMashiach, who would choose to lay down his life and take it back up again so that we all could be once again connected to the unconditional Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. So we read about that in verse 17 and 18. And it came to be when the sun went down and it was dark, that see, a smoking oven and a burning torch passing between those pieces. On the same day, Yahweh made a covenant with Abram, saying, I have given this land to your seed, from the river of Mitzrayim, Egypt, to the great river, the river Euphrates. And that smoking oven and burning torch that passed through the pieces was Yahusha. That was foretelling of his day, that he would lay down his life and take it back up again. And that was the only way to connect us back to the original unconditional promise in Genesis 12. Now, much like the flaying of the animals in Genesis 15 that we just read about, we will see in Genesis 17, we once again see the flaying of flesh, but this time through the act of circumcision. You see, the seed of the covenant would pass through Abraham's flayed flesh, flayed circumcised flesh that would conceive Isaac through the union with Sarah. So this was the time that Isaac was conceived. Abraham was circumcised, and then through the union with Sarah, the seed conceived Isaac. So this happened with Sarah, did not happen with Hagar nor Keturah, because the seed of promise was to come through Isaac and the union with Sarah. So in Genesis 17:24-26, we read, and Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised that same day. So when Abraham conceived Ishmael with Hagar, he was not circumcised, because here we see, he didn't get circumcised to the same day that Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old. They both were circumcised on the same day. It would be a year later, when Abraham's 100, that he would have Isaac with Sarah. And in Genesis 18, when Yahweh visits Abraham and tells Abraham that Sarah would conceive, Sarah was very elder and she thought it was rather humorous, and she laughs at the thought of conception in her old age. You can't blame her, can you? My goodness, but I guess that's just our human side, is it not? And in Genesis 18:13-14, we read, and Yahweh said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I truly have a child since I am old? Is any matter too hard for Yahweh? At the appointed time, I am going to return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah is to have a son. So nothing is too difficult for Yahweh. We must always remember that, especially in the days in which we live. So I'm taking you on some of the side journeys of Stephen's witness before the council. I'm taking you on all the territory he was covering. He may have not said each of these scriptures aloud, but his audience at that time, their mind was going back in time, and all of these things that they were exposed to growing up, and all these understandings that were passed on from generation to generation, is all coming to the surface. And Stephen is articulating it very, very clearly, as we too should be articulating it to those around us. This is so important. This is so important. But people's attention span these days are so short, so limited. May those attention spans desire to know truth and direction, because without covenant with Yahweh, we're lost. We're without hope. He is the one that has saved us through his son, Yahusha HaMashiach. Are we going to ignore him and turn to man? Are we going to follow mixed doctrine and man-made holidays? Are we going to accept man-made religions? Or are we going to become his kingdom of priests after the order of Melchizedek and serve him? This is not our home. We are his ambassadors. Stephen continues, and Elohim spoke in this way, that his seed would be sojourning in a foreign land, and that they would be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. And the nation to whom they shall be enslaved, I shall judge, said Elohim, and after that they shall come out and serve me in this place. And he gave him the covenant of circumcision, and so he brought forth Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac brought forth Jacob, and Jacob brought forth the 12 ancestors. So again, look at the footnotes. Look at the footnotes. Genesis 15, that's when it was all shared. All that Stephen just stated there was all shared in Genesis 15. And in addition, Exodus 3, verse 12. Now, while Jacob eventually goes and dwells in Goshen after the famine, he settles in Goshen in Egypt. And he's reunited with his son, Joseph. And Joseph brings his 2 sons to his father, Jacob. We read about that in Genesis 48. And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me and said to me, see, I am making you fruitful and shall increase you and make of you an assembly of peoples and give this land to your seed after you as an everlasting possession. And now your 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Mitzrayim, Egypt, are mine, as Reuben and Shimon, Simon, they are mine. So Ephraim and Manasseh would be considered Jacob's sons as well. The righteous scarlet thread of redemption was never broken from Adam, the first Melchizedek preacher of righteousness, to the second Adam, Yahusha HaMashiach, the Melchizedek righteous prophet, priest, and king. Though we will see that after the sin of the golden calf, the Aaronic Levitical priesthood was implemented to administer the harsh schoolmaster of the book of the law. The Aaronic Levitical priesthood would reign temporarily until Yahusha would come and once again elevate the Melchizedek kingdom back, elevate it back to its reigning position, because the Melchizedek order preceded the Aaronic Levitical priesthood, and the Aaronic Levitical priesthood reigned until Yahusha would once again restore the Melchizedek priestly line that ran in a denigrated position back to its reigning position and back to covenant Torah, and no longer be under the harsh schoolmaster of the book of the law. The 2 priesthoods ran parallel. This is important too. The 2 priesthoods ran parallel during this time as the people lived as a nation with a singular priest, rather than as a kingdom of priests, plural, since they broke their covenant. And that original covenant, the original marriage covenant, is stated in Exodus 19 through Exodus 24:11. So this is so important to understand. Or are you listening? This is very important to understand. The royal Melchizedek righteous line that would lead to Yahusha never went away. It was always present. The royal line continued in a denigrated position waiting for the promise of our high priest and king after the order of Melchizedek. Then he would elevate it back to its reigning position. He would fulfill that blood covenant of the flaying of the animals in Genesis 15 to connect us back to the promise of Abraham. And keep in mind also that Yahusha was from the tribe of Judah and not from the tribe of Aaron. So there's a lot going on here. A lot going on here. In the book of Acts, it's explosive. I mean, it's explosive through the power of the Ruach HaKodesh being given at Pentecost. Everything changed. Yahusha had once again elevated the Melchizedek priesthood back to its reigning position. He had once again elevated covenant Torah to us, given us a new covenant that was blood ratified with his precious blood. And he gave us the elements of our covenant confirming meal with him. That's huge. Do we even comprehend what's going on in the book of Acts? Because that is what should be going on in our lives as true believers. We've shifted back to covenant Torah, back to his feast days, back to his Shabbats, back to knowing the difference between clean and unclean. Everything changed for the good, for the glorious good. But sadly, mixed doctrine is being fed in most man-made religions. And until we go back to his word, until we follow this pathway that, for an example of what Stephen shared, it will take us through the Melchizedek Covenant Confirming Gospel message in all truth and backed up with scripture, verse by verse. It's there. But we have to take the time, the energy, the risk, and the love to walk in truth. Because honestly, not everyone can handle the truth. Oh, they've grown comfortable, very comfortable with man-made traditions and man-made holidays. They cry if you try to take their holidays away from them. Isn't that what Israel did? They gravitated to the traditions of man. And isn't that why Yahweh said that they do not listen to me? They do this evil? Do you think just because they did it, they were evil? And if we do it today, we would not be considered doing evil before Yahweh when he's given us his word? Are we so comfortable that we have his word, yet we think that's all we need is have it on a table next to us? We don't have to read it and understand it. And he knows the amount of deception that exists all around us. He knows that. And he can use even those traditional churches to introduce us to his word. But he refuses to just leave us in a neutral state. He wants us to continue to grow and learn and question what you're being taught. Because we know his word will not return void, correct? So even like most of us started in traditional church settings, he did use his word to introduce us to truth. And because he did that, we saw some things didn't coincide with his word. And we began to question, and we began to say, well, that's not right. Then we had to come to a decision. Well, am I going to follow man or am I going to follow Yahweh? And most of us gathered today, well, we made that choice. No, we're going to follow Yahweh. No, we're not going to worship on Sunday. We're going to worship on the Sabbath. No, we're not going to follow man-made tradition holidays. We're going to follow his feast days, our wedding rehearsals, our very wedding rehearsals to prepare us for his return. So the preachers of righteousness, the royal line of the Melchizedek order, was from the very beginning. Yahweh instantly began his plan of redemption as soon as Adam and Eve fell. He implemented his plan of redemption for us through the royal line, the royal righteous line, from the very beginning all the way to Yahusha HaMashiach, and through the new covenant, once again, making us, Israel, his kingdom of priests from every tongue, tribe, people, and nation. They all must enter through the door. All must be washed by the blood of the Lamb. All must receive him and partake of his covenant confirming gospel message for those that want to receive him. But he's given us free choice. You can reject him. I wouldn't advise that. But he's given all free will. What will it be? Because your decision will determine your destination. So the preachers of righteousness started with Adam, then Seth, then Enosh, then Canaan, then Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, he was taken. Then it was Methuselah, Lamech died, and then Noah was the 8th preacher of righteousness. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 5, but preserved Noah, a proclaimer of righteousness, and 7 others, bringing in the flood on the world of the wicked. Then following Noah as the 8th preacher of righteousness came Shem. And Shem was the Melchizedek sovereign of Salem that we read about in Genesis 14. And Melchizedek, sovereign of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was the priest of the Most High El, and he blessed him, Abraham, and said, blessed be Abram of the Most High El, possessor of the heavens and earth. And Melchizedek, sovereign of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was the priest of the Most High El, and he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of the Most High El, possessor of the heavens and earth. I put that in there twice so we won't forget it, I suppose. So through Shem, we see the progression through the generations to Terah, Abraham's father. And then Abraham married Sarah, and they had Isaac. And Isaac married Rebekah, and then Jacob. And then Jacob, they had Jacob, and Jacob had the 12 patriarchs through Leah, Zilpah, Bilhah, and Rachel. Then Stephen continues, and the ancestors, becoming jealous, sold Joseph into Mitzrayim, Egypt. But Elohim was with him. Skip down to verse 10. And delivered him out of all his afflictions and gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh, sovereign of Egypt. And he appointed him governor over Egypt and all his house. But once again, we see the cross-reference footnotes, Genesis, Genesis, Genesis. We must know the front of the book to understand the back of the book. So let's look at some of these cross-references. Genesis 37:11, and his brothers envied him, but his father guarded the word. And then skipping to verse 28 in Genesis 37. And men, Midianite traders, passed by. So they pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt, Mitzrayim. And then in chapter 39, verse 2, and it came to be that Yahweh was with Joseph, and he became a prosperous man and was in the house of his master, the Mitzrayim, the Egyptian. And then in verse 21 of chapter 39, but Yahweh was with Joseph and extended loving commitment to him, and he gave him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So we know that Joseph was a type and shadow of the Messiah that would come. And Stephen was articulating this very clearly, spelling it out from the very beginning for all those present in Acts chapter 2, after the death, burial, and resurrection of Yahusha HaMashiach. He was spelling it all out from the beginning. And likewise, if you really want to know how to rightly divide his word of truth, you have to spell it out from the beginning. You just have to spell it out from the beginning to understand who you truly are, to understand covenant Torah, how to rightly divide his word of truth. And we'll get into more of this, but we're going to take it several verses at a time. We're not going to do all of chapter 7 today. And the cross-reference to Genesis 41 is also listed, verse 37 through 46. And the word was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, could we find another like him, a man in whom is the spirit of Elohim? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since Elohim has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. Be over my house, you yourself, and at your mouth all my people shall kiss. Only in the throne am I greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took his seal ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he dressed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, bow the knee. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without a word from you, let no man lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zanephneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, sovereign of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And Yahweh had positioned him for that in conjunction with the promise he had given to Abraham. So just within Acts chapter 7, 1 through 10, Stephen traced the footsteps of their ancestors back to the promise given to Abraham, then unto Isaac and to Jacob and the 12 patriarchs, which would now be inclusive of Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. The promise, Yahusha HaMashiach, manifested in the flesh. And the very council Stephen stood before missed him, totally missed him. So I pray you have a blessed Shabbat today. And next week, we will continue in Acts chapter 7, in which Stephen so divinely presented the Melchizedek message, the royal line of righteousness. Shabbat Shalom.